Hello. In the 20th century, society faced an unprecedented burden of traumatic loss. In just two generations, people experienced countless senseless death and deep personal grief. This overwhelming trauma made it incredibly difficult for families to cope with loss, especially when the emotional impact was not acknowledged or addressed. It's only in recent decades that we began to understand the lasting effects of the trauma suffered by children and adults during the Second World War. Many of these individuals, especially orphans, were denied the opportunity to mourn. In some countries, children affected by interwar and post-war violence were even prohibited from mourning the loss of their parents, which led to long-term uncertainty and delayed acceptance of death. The lack of public mourning and societal support left these mourners isolated, unable to find the support they needed to heal. Although no major battles or war fronts took place on Slovenian soil, the consequences of the war were devastating. Out of a population of 1.5 million, an estimated 100,000 people lost their lives, placing Slovenia among the nations with the highest mortality rates during and after the war. Tragically, at least 30,000 of these deaths were never officially recognized, leaving families unable to mourn or even locate their loved ones' burial sites. This profound loss and lack of closure highlight the enduring emotional scars and tragic impact of the war on Slovenians. The bereavement process is not a linear path, but rather a parallel journey of reconciling with the past while finding a way to move forward. This is captured beautifully in the dual process model of coping with bereavement, which highlights two interconnected orientations, loss-oriented and restoration-oriented. The loss-oriented side focuses on confronting grief, allowing ourselves to acknowledge the pain, process emotions, and make peace with the past. At the same time, the restoration-oriented side emphasizes adapting to changes, exploring new roles, and rebuilding a sense of connection with the world. An essential part of this process is oscillation, the natural movement between these two modes of coping. The oscillations help us honor the loss while creating space for growth, resilience, and new relationships. Ultimately, the bereavement process allows us to reconnect with life and others fully, bridging the gap between the weight of the past and the promise of the future. The grave holds deep meaning for mourners. It becomes a focal point for grief, a place to connect with the deceased and to perform rituals that bridge the transition from life to death. Visiting the grave helps survivors process their loss while continuing to live, nurture relationships, and stay part of their community. On the other hand, not knowing a grave's location can leave grief unresolved, making it harder to heal. Funeral rituals have symbolic power. They help transition the deceased from life to death and guide the bereaved into their new roles in the community. These rituals allow for the public expression of grief, affirm relationships, and maintain a sense of continuity. Successful grief resolution involves transformation, transition, and connection. Rituals provide the structure and social support needed for healing. Some deaths, sudden, violent, or stigmatized, can disrupt the grieving process. When mourners are denied rituals or their grief is not recognized, they may experience disenfranchised or complicated grief. To resolve grief, communities must validate the mourner's loss, acknowledge their pain, and ensure the deceased is treated with dignity. Support and recognition are key to healing. The dual process model emphasizes that healthy grief requires oscillation between confronting the pain of loss and engaging with life changes and new experiences. Complicated grief disrupts this balance, trapping individuals in a cycle of persistent sorrow or avoidance. Interventions should aim to restore this oscillation to promote healing and adaptation at personal, relational, and societal level. Cemeteries are more than just places of rest. They symbolize peace, reflection, and the fragile nature of life. They stir a range of emotions, not just sadness, but also calmness and contemplation, reminding us how fleeting life truly is. Rituals like burial and memorial services are powerful acts of support. These communal moments help families and individuals navigate their grief, whether through a graveside ceremony or later visits. Mourning together fosters healing and acceptance. Throughout history, mourning rituals have been essential. They allow us to integrate death into life and help survivors find meaning and transformation in their loss. A systemic approach reminds us that grief is not just personal, it ripples through families and even generations. As Walsh and McGoldrick say, when family members share their experience of loss, they discover one of the most powerful healing tools, each other. And clear information and open communication about loss create a path for emotional recovery and the reorganization of life.